Bob Katter really needs no introduction, but just a few brief notes about his background. You may have seen on his very impressive bio on the tables there. He leapt to national prominence in 1964 when, as a clearly misguided teenager, he and a few of his mates decided to throw eggs at the Beatles when they were visiting Brisbane, which resulted in George Harrison at a later press conference describing Bob and his mates as a bunch of schmucks. Bob Katter has served as a lightning rod for opinion ever since. He describes himself as arguably the most recognised politician in Australia behind serving Prime Ministers, and I think that's pretty much on the knocker. He has spent 43 years in both federal and state parliaments. He has represented the sprawling seat of Kennedy in North Queensland in the federal parliament since back in 1993, and before that he held several ministerial positions in the Queensland state government. As a key independent in the federal parliament, he has been courted sometimes very vigorously by both coalition and Labor governments and coalition and Labor governments in waiting. And he has always, and this is a very important point, he's always been a tireless advocate of the concerns of rural and regional Australians, voters who far too often are ignored in the national political debate. So, to talk about the undoubtedly very exciting political year ahead, the impact of the Trump factor on Australia, and a range of other things, please welcome to the podium Bob Katter.
I have my wife here today, which means I'll be roundly criticised for whatever I say today. I was on with Dr. Emerson, Minister, and George Brandis on one of those shows, it might have been Q&A, and one of the ladies said to Brandis, she said, methinks that smacks somewhat of the woman's place should be in the kitchen. And Brandis said, no. My party has more women representatives than any parliamentary delegation in Australia. And Emerson rather smugly said, my Premier is a woman, my Governor is a woman, my Prime Minister is a woman, my Governor-General is a woman, my case rests. And the camera came back to me, and I said, in my family, one of those rare commodities, all my forebears were here in 1870, came from all over the place, but particularly on my father's side, the woman's place was always in the kitchen, definitely. And from there, she ruled every aspect of our lives with a ruthless brutality. I got a lot of cheers and laughs. I can assure you it's the same in my family. Having said those things, I just... bear with me for 1 second. We people in the bush, we still have poetry and singing, those sort of things. Freedom's on the wallaby. She'll knock the tyrants silly. She'll light another fire, she'll boil another billy. Our fathers toiled for bitter bread, whilst bludgers thrived beside them. Clothes to wear and food to eat, their native home denied them. And so they climbed upon a ship. And when they became sick of royalty's regalia, they climbed upon a ship and came out to Australia. And now that we have made this land a garden full of promise, old greed must crook his dirty hand and come to take it from us. But we will raise a rebel flag, as others have done before us, and we will sing a rebel song and join in rebel chorus. We will make the tyrants feel the sting of those that they will throttle, and they needn't say the fault is ours if blood should stain the wattle. And like a number of the poems from the 1900s, Dame Mary Gilmore's, Henry Lawson's, you can't say it without actually spitting out the rage and fury. When 1 in 30 of us went down the mines, as we all did here in Victoria, and as we all did in North Queensland, that's the only industries we had really. When we went down the mines, 1 in 30 of us never came back up or died of meningitis. And in the cane fields of North Queensland, 1 in 30 of us that went in the cane fields, similarly, never came back out again. They were the conditions we worked in. When we fought and we were shot dead, 2 of us at Burke, 2 of us in Innisfail, hometown where I come from, and Michael's colleague comes from Innisfail. 2 of them shot dead in the rioting, trade unionism, and the entire AWU executive jailed for 3 years with hard labour for having a strike. When people like my great-granddaddy put, in terms of today's money, over $1 million behind the strike fund in 1894, because there was a battle raging, and men of conviction stood up. And a lot of you were surprised, because I used to be relegated to being extreme right wing and have a very close association, our party, with the CFMEU. But you know, because why don't we die down the mines today? It is because of people like that do not follow a political philosophy, but follow the convictions, standing up for their people. And it bears saying here today, because Michael O'Connor is here today, but as president of the CFMEU for Australia, he was the person that held up John Howard's hand in Tasmania and directed all real Labor supporters in Australia to vote for the Liberal Party, because they were going to save the jobs and not the trees, whereas Mr Latham was going to save the trees and not the jobs. They stand up on conviction. They are men of conviction. There are still some of them out there. After the war, in my very, very good history of Australia, incredible race of people, I named the chapter Walking with Giants. And Chifley, of course, easily the greatest of Australian Prime Ministers. Chifley gave us the telephones. He gave us the Snowy Mountains. He gave us the Holden motor car. He gave us 25,000 houses. He eradicated tuberculosis. This was a proactive Prime Minister. This was a Prime Minister that did something for the people. And it cost him greatly. He had to stand up to the unions and caused a lot of strikes during winter, and it cost him greatly. So those were the years the men of conviction. In my home state of Queensland, when Bajocki Peterson was being buried, the much maligned Bajocki Peterson, Peter Beattie, his political opponent, all of his life, Peter had been his opponent. But Peter had very great respect for Bajocki Peterson. When he was burying him, he said, "The coal industry of this country, the backbone of the Australian economy," we have Raj from Adani here today, the backbone of the Australian economy for 60 years was created by this man. Tourism in Queensland, our second biggest industry, was created by this man. He should have also said the aluminium industry was created by this man. So we have this tradition, Baldies and Playfords down here similarly, they created industry. And the CEO of the Murray-Darling Local Government Authorities, Emma, she uses a term, and this is a very, very good term to use. It is made money. And I said, "What do you mean by made money?" She said, "Well, you open up a coal mine, you make money. You build a factory, you make money, right?" Well, I said, "Well, how else do you what do you mean by..." And she said, "Well, you transfer money. There's made money and there's transferred money." And I did an interview, I don't know if the journalist is here today, yesterday on Melbourne radio, and he said, "We have the greatest jobs growth in Australia." I said, "Yeah, there's transferred money. The transferred jobs. You take money off the people over here and you give it to people over here. You say, 'Oh, geez, we created all these jobs.'" Well, I mean, classical cannibalism economics. And this is great. In Queensland, you can buy a lot of votes in Brisbane, where all the vast bulk of Queensland's population is in Brisbane and surrounds. And every time they get an election coming on, they build another tunnel. It's the most tunnelled city in the world. And there are 24 kilometres of tunnels. Sydney only has 14 kilometres of tunnels. Sydney with 5.5 million people, Brisbane with 1.3 million people. But he refers to it as tunnel vision, the economics of Queensland, tunnel vision. Talking here today, and one of the reasons I was asked to talk today was, what is happening out there? These are wild times. Trump is not a Republican. I read where he was a registered Democrat 6 years ago, and has always been a Democrat. These are wild times. Brexit, England leaving the common market. In Orange, a seat that has never been anything else except a country party stroke national seat for forever, is lost to a third party, one of the third force parties. What is going on here? I mean, Pauline Hanson is scoring 27%, whereas the major parties are scoring 21% in major cities in Queensland. And of course, we've been a beneficiary, our party also, of this movement. But what is going on out there? Now, I will tell you, before I return to Donald Trump, I will start with Donald Trump. I've never followed an American election in my life. I've never watched a single American politician on the media ever in my life, except when I was John F. Kennedy. That would be the only exception. And most of you weren't born when John F. Kennedy was around. But I did watch the first Republican debate. Cruz and Rubio and the others were all doing the usual political thing. You lied, and I can prove you lied. You have changed your position on the Mexicans coming across the border 5 times, and that was what it's all about. And Trump, you represent the filthy rich that are corrupting this country and taking all of our money. You are the epitome. That's what they all said. Trump, he didn't even know if anyone else was there. And this is what he said, and I remember it vividly, and I will always remember it. He said, when there is a hiccup in the world economies, China pulls its currency down, and we give them a lecture. When I become president, we won't be giving them a lecture. We will be giving them a lesson. And I turned to Susie and I said, would to the good Lord that we have someone in Australia to stand up and say that. In my history of Australia, one of the stories I most love is the story of Lawrence Hartnett. And if ever there was a great Australian, it was Lawrence Hartnett. He was an English migrant, but he just loved this country. In the conclusion of his own book, he said, I dedicate my book to my lovely wife of 54 years. He said, to my 7 children and 15 grandchildren, all good Australians. That was how he ended his book. All good Australians. He devoted his whole life to delivering to his country manufacturing. It's not good enough for just to be a quarry. This country needs to be a sophisticated economy. We need to be able to produce motor cars. And I sit under a big picture of Jack McEwen. And Jack looks down at me every day. And Jack McEwen was Minister for Ordnance in the Second World War. And he said, I could not breathe properly when I realised that our country could not make a tank. It could not make a fighter plane. It could not even make an artillery piece. And part of the story on Lawrence Hartnett, the founder of Holden, is how he built an artillery piece. Those artillery pieces that he built arrived 48 hours before the Japanese took Port Moresby. They arrived just on the cusp of the occupation of Port Moresby. General Mackay told the Australian Cabinet that if they take Port Moresby, they have air cover over northern Australia. We cannot stop the invasion of Australia. All we can do is defend a line from Brisbane through Sydney, Melbourne, and around to Adelaide. It wasn't a Brisbane line, as everyone thought. No. All they're going to defend was what I call the golden boomerang, Brisbane, through the big cities to Adelaide. That was it. The rest go to the Japanese because we can't defend it. Well, how could you defend it? You couldn't make an artillery piece. Well, at the present moment, we can't make a litre of petrol in this country. We import 96% of our petrol is imported. Now, I've worried you, I know. but you can relax because it's a very secure supply line. It comes from the Middle East through Singapore with Malaysia. Not to put too fine a point on it, Muslim country to the north, Indonesia to the south. So don't worry, it's very secure, that pipeline. And if you recall, Japan went to war because someone cut off their oil pipeline. Well, if they blow up 12 tankers coming to Australia, I hope you're all in good condition so you can walk to work. Because there's only 2 weeks of supply in Australia, the NRMA report. Now, these 2 stories I want to tell as I conclude. This is the story of a lady called Kathy Fabris. And I knew Kathy because I'm a person who frequents hotels, not all the time, darling, just every now and then. And Kathy worked off and on the bar to pick up a bit of money. Johnny, her husband, I've never seen Johnny wear shoes. He must wear them when he's working, but I never saw him. They had a small tobacco farm, borrowed a lot of money, bought another 2 or 3 farms, quite substantial tobacco growers. And nothing to do with people not smoking. There was, if you used more than 50% foreign tobacco in a cigarette in Australia, then you were punished with nearly 100% tariff, right? So we wanted to protect the industry, which was mainly based here in Victoria, in a town along the Murray, and in a town in North Queensland, Mareeba, where Kathy Fabris comes from. And anyway, they sent delegation after delegation. What is the purpose in putting 8,000 Australians out of work? What for? What for? They're still going to smoke. Why do you want to put 8,000 Australians out of work? We've got no replacement industry that we can put in place. So after delegation after delegation, they decided to pull the heartstrings. So they sent down 4 mothers. And this little Kathy Fabris, she's about 32, 33 at the time, 5 kids, and a very attractive lady, completely naive, just an ordinary knockabout little Australian. And she said, oh, Bob, once they know the pain that's going to fall upon us, they will change their minds. Those blokes they sent down there, a bunch of, men are like, Bob. She said, so we went in to see the leader of the Liberal Party. He had his big 12-foot feet up on the table, didn't even stand up when the ladies came in. And he gave them a lecture on free markets and how it's going to save them. We went and saw John Anderson, and I don't hesitate to say this. He kept pushing his hair back and looking at some mirror somewhere, I suppose. And he said, yes, it's terrible. Yes, it's terrible. And Kathy said, yeah, but what are you going to do about it? Oh, we will have to look at it. And the only thing he was looking at seemed to be, as I say, a mirror. Then we went to see, well, I didn't go on the ALP to see the ALP delegation. I was still on the National Party at the stage. But the ALP mayor in Mareeba, he said, hey, Bob, it was worse with our blokes. I said, it couldn't have been worse. Don't say that, Ron. And he said, mate, if anything, it was worse. And Kathy we're in a taxi, so going back to the motel. And Kathy wasn't listening to us. She's just a little mother. And she's looking out the window. She's not hearing anything we're saying. And she said, we paid $350,000 for the quotas. We've got no way of repaying them now. We've got no money coming in. I've got 5 little children to feed. And she sobbed her heart out all the way back to the motel. Until the day I die, I'll remember Kathy Fabris in that car. Now, you can repeat that 50,000 times over in this city when the motor vehicle industry goes down. There's nowhere for him to go. The politicians don't care. I paid a researcher to come in, and I said, I want you to get every speech given by a member of parliament, and there's 120 speeches given, 120 members of parliament. I said, I want what they're suggesting we do to look after the 50,000 people that are still in the industry at this stage. And I want you to tell me how they could save the motor vehicle industry. Some might say how we... She came back to me and she said, not one single speech mentioned how to save the industry or what alternative employment there was. None. I said, none at all. She said, here's the report. Here's the report. Go and read the speeches for yourself. Not one. And, I mean, I always say to my son, you only get bashed up once, Robbie, you know, because you find out how he bashed you up and then you do it back to him. So you only get one bashing, right? So it's the same in this. Well, what are all the other countries doing? Well, their governments buy United States-made motor cars. Brazilians buy, their governments buy Brazilian-made motor cars. The Europeans buy European-made motor cars. And all you've got to do in Australia, believe it or not, and I don't know if the figures are right, but the published figures say 23% of the vehicles sold in Australia are sold under a government contract. In Queensland, all of the private schools, all the Catholic schools, all buy their motor cars under a government contract. 23%. Well, there you've got a market of 23%. All you've got to do is say, you've got to buy an Australian car. And we have a motor vehicle industry. And we have an elaborately transformed product. If you read the OECD reports, all the key indicators, one of them is elaborately transformed industry. These are advanced economies. We have the lowest level of manufacturing, elaborately transformed, of any OECD country. The average is 32%. In Australia, it's 6%. You're in a primitive country that doesn't mind. Pizzotti, plant operator, in a meeting in Ingham, they said, well, what are we going to do? Just be a mining country, because we're closing down the sugar industry. Well, it's going to be a mining country. He said, no, we're not a mining country. Mining is when you take it out of the ground and sell a metal. That's mining. When you take it out of the ground and sell the ground, that's quarrying. We're a quarrying country. We send concentrates overseas. We don't send metal overseas anymore. And there's a reason for that. We deregulated the electricity industry, and we now have the second highest electricity charges in the world. We can't afford to process anymore. And I know, because I was mining. I'm a mining man. I'm not a cattle man, as everyone thinks, but I came out of the mining industry, worked all of my life as a labourer, and then worked my own mines and floating my own mining companies. So we're quarrying. Now, this is what it comes to. If you're going to buy everything, this mic, my biros, my glasses, this notepad here, if you're going to buy all your motor cars, all your petrol, all your electric light bulbs, all your tyres, if you're going to buy everything from overseas, you've got to be able to sell something. You've got to be able to sell something. Well, what do we sell? We are now down to only two things. There are only two things Australia sells. That's iron ore and coal. That's it. They bring in 130 billion. The next item down, look right down here, see it? Is gold or beef, which is about 10 billion. So the big two, 130 billion. The next two, but now we've got coal and iron ore. But look, coal is really bad. We've got to do away with coal, right? So we'll import our photovoltaic cells from overseas. We'll export the jobs in the power stations and the coal mines. We'll export them overseas. We'll tell the Indians, no, you're not allowed to have power stations because you might destroy the world. Well, quite frankly, I mean, if the truth is, and I like to pride myself on doing a lot of homework on these things, if you use super, ultra critical technology, you will cut in half the CO2 emissions from coal-fired power station. If you put in 10,000 hectares of the new gum trees developed by the Brazilians, they grow 3 times faster than any other tree on earth, you put in 10,000 hectares of them, you'll absorb all of the CO2 coming out of a power station. All of it. Right? And where the Galilee Basin is, half our coal reserves are Galilee. We haven't touched a single, kilogram of coal out of the Galilee because no one will build a railway line into it. Adani's trying, but at the present moment, they're still failing to get the railway line built. But that area is called the desert uplands, and rightly so. It is very much the desert uplands. Well, wouldn't it be nice to put, 20,000 hectares of gum trees into the desert uplands? They can do that tomorrow as part of their program. Ladies and gentlemen, Donald Trump said, they will get a lesson if China pulls down their currency. And Doug Anthony, my young man, I don't think he was even in Parliament, he got me aside and he said, don't worry about subsidies and tariffs. Country Party, we don't worry about subsidies and tariffs. What we die in the ditches over is the value of the dollar. And we once upon a time, like Labor people represented by a Labor Party, which they're not now. Country parties, farmers represented by a country party, which they're not now. In fact, it was under the Liberal National Party government that the dollar was doubled in value. And I don't want to go sideways intimately on that at the present moment. But if you've got interest rates of 3% when the rest of the world has interest rates of 0.27%, clearly your dollar is going to fly through the roof. Clearly your cattlemen are going to go broke. And I was on telephone last night for an hour. The police were dragging a family, it's public knowledge, so I can mention their name, Bradshaw's. He said, I'm not leaving my homestead. So the police dragged him off and he's in a jail now. And that is happening probably once a month. We get a call along those lines. And some of them, they don't get dragged out of their homestead. The bloke on a homestead south of Charters Towers, this was west of Charters Towers, my hometown, south of Charters Towers, he said, you're not ever going to take this station property off me. You never get me out of this homestead. And they said, yes, we are. We've got the court order. The police are coming. Well, they didn't. Of course, he poured petrol all over the homestead and incinerated himself to death. His 5 little children were pretty upset. Their dad committed suicide that way. But we put up with one of those about every month in North Queensland. But nobody cares. And why? Because the Labor Party, and Rand quite rightly says the history of Australia, the first half of the last century, is the story of Labor. And that is truly right. Like men of conviction. And then Menzies, and I really didn't know this till I was studying it for my book, but Menzies was a man of conviction. And he could see the great dangers of communism. I, as a young person, all my friends were running around with little red Mao Zedong books, He was our great hero, Mao Zedong. Murdered 48 million people. Oh, great hero. But Menzies could see that. And his great cause was anti-communism. And the great cause of the Liberal Party was anti-communism. It wasn't developmentalism like the Country Party. It was anti-communism. And there was a good reason for it. But when Keating removes the socialism plank, as Rod Cavalier said, there's no reason for the Labor Party to exist, because no socialism anymore. And there was no reason for the Liberal Party to exist, because they were the sort of anti-socialists, if you like. Well, there's no socialism, so how can you be an anti-socialist? And so what we had then was not developmentalism or men of conviction. We had careerism. And I always think that little Billy McMahon in my book, it switches from Walking with Giants, the Jack McEwens and Jockey Petersons and Ben Chifleys and most of all probably Ted Theodore, the great Labor leader. Walking with Giants, and then it starts, the rise of the Lilliputians. And it starts with Billy McMahon, the little insignificant looking little bloke with big ears, and he had a little squeaky, effeminate voice. And I remember graphically, he stood up in the Parliament of Australia as Prime Minister, and he hated a bloke called Jim Killen, who was a big ex-ringer, worked out stockman, and fighter pilot in the I'm being told I better wind up, fighter pilot in the war, Jim Killen, a man's man in every respect, big, deep, baritone voice, and they hated each other, so Jim Killen's on the back bench and Billy McMahon's Prime Minister, and Billy gets up and said, sometimes, this is the Parliament of Australia, sometimes I think that I'm my own worst enemy. And a big voice behind him said, not while I'm in this place, you're not. So ladies and gentlemen, I just I'm here in Melbourne today, and one of the most beautiful quotes that I love rereading in my own book, but it's in other books as well. It's not confined to me, the story, and it's a wonderful story. And I'll just conclude on this note. But you know, all the freedoms and wealth and prosperity, we visited the Sofitel last night, and I mean, what we've achieved in Australia, the great splendour and grandeur of that place. It was given to us by people that made great sacrifices. I mean, this started with blokes living in a tent above a hole in the ground at Ballarat and Bendigo. And now we have St. Patrick's Cathedral, one of the great, most beautiful buildings in Australia. And we have the grandeur and palatialness. So I'll just finish on this note, and I'll read you this quote, as in a number of books, but it's also in the book I wrote. They bought, this is one of the battalions, the main battalion that did the fighting. My battalion, the 49th, 800 men in the battalion. When we were relieved at Sanananda, there were only 28 of us able to walk out unassisted. That was all that was left of the battalion. 800 men went up, 28 were able to walk out unassisted. But this is the 39th who did most of the fighting. Joe Dawson, Sergeant Major. They brought 10 other soldiers in with you. They had scrub typhus. They're all dead. Everyone thought you were going to die too, but I didn't. I thought you were going to live, and I'll tell you why. Then she smiled, reached under his pillow, and brought out his rosary beads and put them on his chest. Elaine, his girlfriend, back in Melbourne, had given them to him to keep him safe. Lying in the bed in the hospital, Joe had plenty of time for thinking. His mind was not on the oppressive heat nor the malaria nor dysentery. It was not on the supply ship, which had taken a direct hit, knocking Joe unconscious and killing 6 of his mates. It was not on the torture of the 1,500-metre vertical climb up muddy slopes and teeming rain, carrying up a gun and a food pack 40 kilograms in weight. Nor was it on the gruelling demand of rotating with his mates Wally Gratz and Ray Phillips on the end of the stretcher where Ray Smith was breathing through a giant hole in his chest, and then he stopped breathing altogether, and we left him in the creek. We couldn't carry him any further, and he was dead. Nor the time he stepped off the track in pitch darkness and fell 30 feet down a cliff face, not knowing whether there was any base. Nor the anxiety as his company sergeant major, his colonel, had gone off into the darkness, never to return. Joe tried not to think about the sustained Japanese siege at Isarava, where his company perimeter had been broken, where they were surrounded and being defeated and being murdered, where he had his runner had tried to track down and kill the 2 Japanese who had penetrated the perimeter. Nor did he think about his runner dying in his arms with a bullet in his chest, dying beside him. He lobbed grenades. He didn't know whether the Japanese had him in their sights. And then he found the 2 Japanese dead after his grenade exploded. Nor the next day of desperate fighting and seeing a bloke go past on a stretcher without a leg and thinking, that's a nice rose he's got on the end of his leg, and knowing that he had lost it. Joe Dawson left Port Moresby weighing 80 kilograms and returned 6 weeks later an emaciated, skeletal 45 kilograms. Joe Dawson clasped his rosary beads the nurse had given him, put on his chest. He didn't want to think about any of these things. He just wanted to go home to Melbourne to be with Elaine. Thank you very much. A very great honour to speak to you today.
Well, Bob, you didn't let me down. Thank you very much, and thank you for setting such a high bar for all of our future speakers at the Press Club this year. Bob has very graciously agreed to take questions, so please, there are roving microphones. Raise your hand and you can say your name and where you're from if you're with an organisation. But Bob, I'll kick it off if you want to come back up here. I just want to ask you...
I'm sorry, everyone. Just before I could ask my staff just to put those slides up, just put them on, and move through them. But you'll see there where 95% of Australians, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
95% of Australians are voting every election for the major parties. And then suddenly, now, in all the main states and in Australia, only 73% are voting for the mainstream parties. There is something going on there of very, very great importance to the nation. And they'll also put up the number of jobs lost in the industries as a result of free market, globalisation, marketism, whatever word you want to call it, and I hope some of you have a shot at me because I love to get up backwards and forwards on the issue of free markets. But there are the figures. There's the result of your policies of free markets. Wool, the fat farmers nation, completely destroyed. Gone forever. And I could go on, but it'll be up there on the board.
Come around. As we start the parliamentary year next year, the Prime Minister, the coalition government's had a pretty rocky start to 2017. How do you think they're going, and how do you rate Malcolm Turnbull's chances of surviving the year?
I don't like buying into the affairs of other parties, but I mean, unless you do something, and it doesn't actually matter a great deal what you do, but you do something, then you are doomed. In a situation where the people have no jobs, now it's not like the job levels, the real job levels of unemployment are about comparable to the Great Depression, are about 17 to 18%, arguably 19, and the Great Depression was 22%. So we're on depression levels, right? But we have welfare now. They had no welfare. So, people are not suffering anything like they suffered then. But if you have this situation where a person can't get a job, as a government, you are doomed. And you better be out there creating jobs somewhere. Build, and I've said this to Malcolm, I say 28 times, build the rail line into the Galilee Basin, half Australia's coal reserves. Build it in there. You've got the markets in India, with Adani being one of 20 companies on the Galilee. Just build that railway line. Now I'll tell you why Malcolm is going downhill and why Bjelke-Petersen, for his entire career, took a little party on 17%, up to 64% when they tried to stab him in the back. Why took him to 74%? Every year we built 360 kilometres of rail line. We built 6,000 kilometres of rail line. The government built that rail line into the coalfields. And when we built the first railway line, this nation, believe it or not, was a coal importing country. In 1960, we were a coal importing country. And the foresight and the risks that these men took. But they weren't there to play tiddlywinks and work out who's going to be the Prime Minister next week. They were there to build a nation. And that nation building stopped back in our state in 1989 when that bloke was stabbed in the back, and from then on, all we've had is careerists in Queensland. But the same thing federally. And you had people that were building things, and I don't want to go on too long, but then suddenly we didn't have people that were building things. People arguing about whether we take a little bit of taxation or some money off some person over there and put it over there, transfer money as opposed to made money.
Actually, while I've got you just on that point, another story of the day. What was your reaction when you heard the Prime Minister donated nearly $2 million of his own money to the Liberal Party?
My reaction was the Liberal Party's in trouble. He's probably brought a little bit of support that he badly needs. And I've known Malcolm most of my life, and I don't want to be here criticising Malcolm. But in the situation he's in, unless you can find something to happen real quick. I mean, there are 50,000 jobs about to vanish here in Melbourne. In North Queensland, 50,000 have already vanished. Anyone trying to hold seats in those places, I wish them well. It ain't going to happen. And if you're at the top job, as I said when we removed the Premier that stabbed Bjelke-Petersen back, I said, look, this is Get Square. I'm not going to say it's not. It's vengeance, yes. It is also survival. You have only one thing that you can do when you're down the hole we're in, and that's change leaders. And if they're down the hole, they will change leaders. And they're going to be down the hole because of those figures that you're watching up there on the board. If you could play them and play them back, that would be good. Thanks, staff. Yeah.
Thanks, Bob. We've got a question over there. Yes.
Thank you, Michael. My name's Chris Lamb, and I used to be with Foreign Affairs, and I worked in the Red Cross, and now I'm here in Melbourne at the university. I hadn't intended to be the first questioner. I thought that would go to the fascinated media, but never mind, I'll do my question. It's very interesting to see what you say and what the figures show about the number of people who vote for independents and third parties. And this has been a trend that I think it's been going on probably now for 20 years and coming to the point you're at, and your figures show that. But now we're at the point where there are 5 people, I think, in the House of Representatives who don't come from the major parties, and without wanting to qualify people as independents or minor parties, you've got that kind of figure. Of those 5, 4 represent seats that would normally reside with the Liberal or National parties. And the other one of them, Denison, could go either way, and the other one is Melbourne.
Actually, my seat is normally a Labor seat.
Normally Labor.
Except for my family, it's always been Labor. And all the state seats within my seat are Labor as well. Yeah, or most of them. Yeah.
Okay, but all right. No, that's
But I get
though.
your point. I get your point's valid. Your
My
point's
point
valid.
is that the Liberal and National parties suffer more from this fracturing
That's correct.
than the Labor Party
Yes,
does. But
absolutely.
I think the Labor Party is coming to that now, and the realisation of that is very strong. And the seat of Melbourne shows that. When you look at Melbourne Ports, which the Labor Party nearly lost last time, Batman, which the Labor Party almost lost last time as well, and the rise of votes for the Greens matters in that. And their views on a subject like coal are diametrically opposed to yours. It's going to be interesting to see the way this all breaks down, but for me the main point is that the days of the major parties are over here, and Donald Trump's election in the United States perhaps says the same thing about that country. And we'll probably see it in a lot of the other traditional Western democracies. How do you see the future of Western democracy as we understand it? Now, before you answer that, I'll say one thing about a place which is not a democracy. Along the same line, yesterday we got the rich news that the man who calls himself Prince Leonard of Hutt was going to abdicate in favour of one of his sons, Graham. Do you think that the emergence of that thing called the Hutt River Province all those years ago was a forerunner to what we're talking about here today?
I like to keep track of, extremist elements and groupings in the Australian theatre, for the sake of a better word. But the extreme right, some of my friends over there, they would agree with you very strongly that Prince Hutt is the way for the future. But look, every country on earth, France, Germany, Italy, they all have multi-party. Japan, all have multi-party systems. It is a very primitive system, a two-party system. America, sadly for them, has it locked into their constitution, but it's a constituency-based system. If I want to run for Parliament, I really got to run for Republicans or Democrats, and I have to face all of the registered Republican or Democrat voters in my electorate in a primary, the same as the president does. They have primaries. So they are constituent-based. In the vote on ethanol, which I followed very closely over there, the 12 states, oil-producing states, all voted against it. And because it is such a logical saying, it's all health. It's about health. Ethanol is not about looking after farmers or even about fuel security. It's about health. Emma, when he introduced it in New South Wales, said 500 people die every year in Sydney that do not have to die. Well, it doesn't seem to have worried his people that followed after him, who've taken the ethanol back down to irrelevancy. But the 12 oil-producing states voted in favour of oil. And all of the other states, I don't know, 48 or whatever it is, they all voted for ethanol. In other words, they vote along constituency lines. But let me go to the rest of the world. I mean, even Britain now is not, a two-party system. But I think the best comment on that comes from, I don't like quoting someone from the Labor Party or the Liberal Party for that matter, but from Albanese, Anthony, he said on the debate, he said, we only had 72 members. This mob have got 76. They have a majority, they can get everything through. We could get nothing through. We only had 72 members, you need 76 to get through. So he said, we did not lose one single vote the whole time we're in government for 3 years. How do we do that? Because we had to sit down and convince, and I was in the chamber, he said people like the member for Kennedy, rockheads and knuckleheads, I had to convince them that what we were doing was the right thing. And we could only proceed if we were able to convince them that what we were doing was the right thing. And he said, there's actually a name for that. It's called democracy. And truly, as a person who was in a political party for the vast bulk of my life, I had no idea what I was voting on. You just go down there and I said, what are we voting on? The bloke said, I've got no idea. So I asked the other bloke, what are we voting on? You've got no idea. You just tell Janet. Now, having said that, I mean, particularly in my case, you know, there are a number of issues that were burning issues for me where I had to cross the floor. But I think there's only been 2 or 3 other people in the last 25 years that have crossed the floor. It doesn't happen in Australia. In America, it happens all the time, all the time. So I mean, we have had a very primitive model. And as you see from those things up on the slide there, we have continuously voted. Around 97% of everyone in Australia votes for the ALP or the LNP. 97%. And that's been going on for, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 years, whatever. And now suddenly, it is not true. It is not true. And in Queensland, which is a very similar state to Victoria, remember we're a gold mining state, that's how we started off, the same as yourselves. My area is the biggest electorate area for dairying in Australia, even though Victoria is by far and away the big dairying state. But you know, they took our guns off us. A lot of people here would think that's a good thing. I didn't. I said to the Premier then, the National Party Premier, I said, my friend, you have destroyed our party. We will never, ever survive what you have just done to us. We're people that believe we don't want the government to look after our home. I'll look after my home. You know, it's an individualism thing. It's not so much a gun thing. But did I stay loyal? I stayed loyal when they deregulated the tobacco industry, took 2,000 jobs out. I stayed loyal when the Liberal Party, National Party, closed down the fishing industry and Kennedy Electric, 2,000 jobs gone. I stayed loyal when they deregulated maize and peanuts, both of them now gone. I stayed loyal when they did away with the tobacco industry. But when it came to dairying, that was just a bridge too far. I just knew at that stage that I couldn't stay any longer. I was living a lie, you know. Now, this is the important thing. I looked up, you know, I'm very self-centered, very self-interested. I looked up what's going to happen to me. Well, what was going to happen to me was I was going to die politically. No independent or third-party person had ever been elected in the history of Australian Parliament. They got elected, but never re-elected. So I had one term, and that was it, all over Red Rover. I was walking into my open grave, and I knew it. And the funny thing, that election was the first time Andrew and Ted Mack got re-elected. It was the first time ever. And now it's just the opposite. They will stay on forever. Unless, and I'm not here to knock Tony Windsor, but Tony voted intelligently and he voted courageously all of his political life. And then, for reasons I just simply do not know, in that hung parliament, he voted with the ALP for 3 years. Well, you can't ask the people to vote for an independent and then vote ALP for the next 3 years on every single issue and still expect that he'd get re-elected. But in spite of the damage that did to the third force movement in Australia, it's coming on very, very strong now. But you've followed, I mean, this is a situation similar to Germany in the 30s. You follow false prophets in this situation. And for those of you thinking Pauline Hanson, well, I'm thinking more of the Greens. You follow false prophets in this situation. You know, we could be a hell of a lot worse off, as was the story in Germany.
I'm Peter Lithgow, I'm a lawyer. I know it's early days, Bob, but do you think President Trump's one term or a two-term president?
I watched Bjelke Petersen, and I wasn't particularly proud of him for doing this, but he bashed up all the demonstrators. I was at university then, and said they're a bunch of bludgeoning university students who get out and do some work, or words to that effect. And police bashed them up and threw them in jail, did all sorts of things. And I thought it was bad. And I moved to stop it from happening. And myself and a bloke who led the Jesuit priests for Australia later on, his father was the Federal Attorney General. So we stopped it. But he had 2 by-elections and he went up 9.5%. I mean, it was just a massive swing to the government in 2 by-elections. You do something. That's why I'm saying, even if it's not a good thing to do, you do something, and people will say, well, this bloke believes in it. What enabled John Howard to get re-elected, in spite of everything, was, funnily enough, that he introduced that fringe benefits tax, which I'm tenaciously opposed to. And 78% of Australians said they're opposed to. But he did something that was very unpopular, obviously believed it was the right thing to do. What impressed people was he did something that he thought was the right thing to do, even though I profoundly believe it was the wrong thing to do. So what I'm saying, you've got to do something. But Malcolm's problem, the problem with the current LNP government, is they're doing nothing. I mean, I think probably the biggest noise has been development of the north. And Stuart Ballantyne sitting over here, we've proposed a canal to get phosphate out, which will enable us to make $5,000 or $6,000 million a year out of fertiliser. Well, they all have a look at it. They spend a fortune having a look at it. They've said they're going to develop the water resource of the north. They've been saying that now for 6 years. We haven't got a shovel of concrete across a gutter in North Queensland. My electorate has as much water as the whole of the rest of Australia put together. And we haven't got a single dam in the whole electorate. We scream and scream and they keep saying something's going to happen, but nothing happens. You keep having nothing happen, you will pay the price.
We've got time for maybe one or two more questions. Please put your hands up. But speaking of third parties, how do you get along with Pauline Hanson at the moment, Bob?
We've been quite staggered by Pauline's voting record. I don't know. We would expect that she is against foreign ownership. Every single person in the federal parliament, outside of LNP, opposed the sale to Shanghai Cred and Gina Reinhardt. Every single person, except for the LNP, of course, and except for Pauline Hanson. And in fact, it led to the great dispute with Cullerton, where, effectively she threw him out of the Senate altogether. The second fight was over the Royal Commission into the banks. And Cullerton, of course, has been a champion of the Royal Commission into the banks, and they had a dreadful fight over the Royal Commission into the banks. Well, I mean, I think it's number 3 on her pamphlet for what they want. She's calling now for a deep government inquiry. Government inquiry. We have one of them every 3 years, either Woolworths or Coles or the banks. We have one every 3 years. And on the issue of bashing up the workers, now some of you may agree with that. I don't. Tenaciously opposed to it, our party. Bash up the workers' legislation, the ABC legislation. And, but again, there's some of the CFMEU people here today that would disagree with me, but I think, basically we got out of the extremism that was in that bill. But, Hanson again voted with the LNP. She was the only one that voted all the time with the LNP. Cullerton did. Again, he was out of step. But the fourth issue was the farmers' issue, the backpackers' tax, farmers and tourist operators' tax. Well, she's supposed to be champion of farmers. Well, you don't vote for a backpackers' tax if you're champion of the farmers. And it's absolutely disastrous for the electorate I represent. And the fruit-picking electorates down here in Victoria the same way. Blueberries are huge down here. Frankie Costa, in fact, is the big boy up in North Queensland now with blueberries. But it was devastating for us. And again, she was the only one that was backing the backpackers tax. So we've been very worried that, maybe we're just looking at, a Liberal wolf in third party, clothing here. But our 2 state members had a meeting with her this week, and all I can say is their opinion is she's singing a different tune. Now, whether her relationship with us is important to her or not, she's the big boy on the block at the present moment, we're not. So, very good question. Whether she's going to survive. She had 11 state members last time, 1 federal member and 1 senator. Within 2.5 years, she had nothing. She's been there for 6 months. She now has 3 senators, not 4. Who removed the other senator? She did. She did. More than anyone else, she did. All I can say is, we are very worried that she's voting with the Liberals all the time. As far as we're concerned, it's Windsor revisited. He voted with the ALP all the time. And secondly, that she'll fall to pieces and win no seats, because we need her to win 5 or 10 seats. You know, we would hope to win 6 or 7 seats, and that will give us most certainly the balance of power in the Queensland Parliament. And then we will build the dams, and then we will build the railway line into the Galilee, and then we will build the canal, the extended waterway, if we've got to call it enhanced extended waterway, not a canal, to get our phosphate out. And then we will give back to our nation 30 and 40,000 million a year in export earnings that are not there at the present moment, and 400,000 jobs. That's what we can give you, if we can get that balance of power. And if, you know, Pauline Hanson will leave voting with the Liberal Party and vote third force policies, which she's always championed.
And lucky last question down at the back there.
Hi, Bob. I'm Jenny Davidson. I'm CEO of the Council of Single Mothers and Their Children Victoria. I know you've worked a lot with Therese Edwards at the National Council, and we so welcome your support. We're fighting hard to get a better deal for single mothers, and it's so offensive to see single mothers again portrayed in the media as lazy, when anyone who's a parent knows that single mothers work harder than couples, you know. But those of them, many of them do work, and those that don't work often have limited skills and limited flexibility. So my question for you is, for all of the workers in this country who do have a limited skill set or a specific skill set, who aren't able to fly in and fly out and build a railroad or, you know, go where the work is, what do you see as a possible future course for us?
I didn't understand what the cultural cringe meant. I come from a little town, Cloncurry, you know. You bash someone up if they don't give you the respect that you're due. It's a matter of honour. We'll go at the back of the pub and settle this little matter. That's the background. I've never cringed to anyone, and I don't know anyone from my hometown that cringes to anyone. Nev Power from my hometown setting up Fortescue Metals. We're very proud of him. He's fitter and turner from the ISA. Nev. He wouldn't bow or bend to anyone, Nev. But when I went to Canberra, doing researching my book, I had the OECD figures on support for agriculture. And this is going in your direction, but you won't see it quite yet. And all the world, the subsidy and tariff, it's called support levels. Support levels for agriculture, every farmer in the world gets 41% of his income from the government. Except if you live in Australia and you only get 4.6% of your income from the government. So we are just collapsing in agriculture. Our sugar industry, still the third biggest agricultural industry, is down 17%. Our cattle numbers are down 23%. Our dairy herd is down 31%. Our wool industry is down 74%. We have just been murdered. Now what we are saying is, I'm not saying we give 41%, I'm saying 10% on everything that comes into the country. Give us something like a level playing field, please. You know, I'm not advocating subsidies and tariffs, I'm just advocating a level playing field. If our competitors have got 41%, I mean, surely you can give us 15%. And if you think, you know, we're good in agriculture, you visit. I've only been in Australia for 7 days to do a quick ethanol tour into North Dakota and into Sao Paulo and Brazil. And you think we're good. You have a look at our competitors. They terrify me. They are so good. They terrify me. But we can beat them if you give us a level playing field. 41% versus 4.7% is not a level playing field. Now, if that 10% comes in, it is our party says that 10% go to you. Right? They go to the mothers. Not just single mothers, but all mothers. But if I was to say, what is the greatest problem in our country? It is the disrespect and the collapse of the respect for motherhood. Motherhood, my daughters tell me, forum, motherhood is almost a dirty word in Australia. We have amongst the lowest birth rates in the world. In fact, if you take out the mothers from overseas out of the equation, 30% of all babies are born to mothers from overseas. If you take the mothers from overseas out of the equation, I would argue we have the lowest birth rate of anywhere in the world. Now, there cannot be a more definitive judgment upon a race of people, what I call an incredible race of people, we Australians. There can't be a more definitive judgment upon us than that we simply eliminate ourselves from the gene pool. So, we can get money in from various places. The taxes that will be coming in from these huge developments. Stewie Ballantyne and Raj are here today. These huge developments. The money that comes in from those, we believe that 25,000 million a year should be going to you mothers, right? And how you can exist when the average cost of accommodation in Australia is $50,000 and the average income for a single mother with 3 kids is about $23,000. Well, I wish you well. I wish you well. Find a good gum tree and put a tent up underneath it. So we very spiritedly say that, I had to talk about other things today, but my original thing for today, first word was motherhood and the lack of motherhood in our country. The most important job of all by far and away. Sorry to say that, Stewie and Raj, but it's more important.
Thank you very much for all the questions. That's where we have to wrap it up. Bob, I have been coming to press club speeches for about 5 years now. I've never seen anything like the speech I've just watched today and probably never will again. We were going to give you a gift. We sometimes give gifts to our speakers, but you simply have to declare it on the register. Paperwork, so we haven't bothered. Please, again, thank Bob Katter.